Edward Sterling had constructed his existence around the principle of control. Each choice, each investment, each meticulously planned step had brought him to an unimaginable level of success. He was a master of the game, fully aware of the dynamics of influence and maneuvering through them with unmatched skill. Yet, everything fell apart in a heartbeat the moment he laid eyes on her. In the lobby of a luxurious resort, he found himself gripping the hand of a little girl with striking blue eyes. Standing before him was the last person he anticipated encountering again, his ex-wife, Clara. The child she cradled was of the perfect age, the likeness undeniable. A chilling awareness took root in his heart. Had Clara been concealing a secret from him all these years? Had he inadvertently strolled by his own daughter, completely unaware of her existence? Edward was not the type to dwell on the past. His whole existence revolved around progress, making choices without a moment's pause, always aware of what lay ahead. He devoted years to mastering the craft of control, building an empire through unwavering determination and discipline. To those looking in, he seemed to possess it all: a thriving business worth millions, authority, sway, and the knack for entering any space and demanding admiration. As he lounged in the opulent lobby of the coastal retreat, cradling a glass of whiskey and allowing the soft murmur of chatter to envelop him, an unexpected sensation began to settle in, the strange burden of fatigue. He arrived with the guise of seeking a rare respite, yet deep down, he was acutely aware that his mind was already occupied with the upcoming meetings, the deals poised for completion, and the phone calls that awaited his attention. He was not particularly skilled at the art of relaxation. He savored another sip, releasing a slow breath as his eyes drifted toward the entrance. It was at that moment he caught sight of her. Initially, he believed his imagination was deceiving him. The figure that emerged from the revolving door bore an uncanny resemblance to a specter from his history, a person he had assured himself he would never encounter once more. She glided with a serene elegance, her dark brown hair flowing over her shoulders as she cradled the small child in her arms. The vision stirred a profound tension within him. Clara. For a brief instant, he simply gazed, struggling to comprehend the scene before him. She appeared nearly unchanged from 3 years prior, still beautiful and poised, yet now there was a subtle layer of fatigue etched into her features. Nothing could have prepared me for the surprise of finding her here, in this unexpected setting, especially with the child she held in her arms. A tiny girl, perhaps just 3 years old, clung to Clara's neck, her face nestled into her mother's shoulder. Edward sensed his fingers clenching around the glass he held. His heartbeat, once steady and controlled, now surged with an inexplicable urgency. He had not laid eyes on Clara since their union came to a close. Their divorce unfolded smoothly, devoid of any theatrical courtroom confrontations or unresolved disputes. She was gone, and he had allowed her to leave, convincing himself it was the right choice. He immersed himself in his tasks, believing that what they had once experienced was merely a fleeting diversion. He had progressed, or so he repeatedly assured himself. Yet, witnessing her now, accompanied by a child who appeared to be just a heartbeat away from the instant she had departed from his existence, an unsettling chill took root in his gut. Could this be her daughter? And if that were the case, why did he feel a nauseating certainty that he already possessed the answer? Clara approached the reception desk, adjusting the child in her arms as she engaged with the hotel staff. Edward hardly noticed anything else in the room. The voices around him blurred into insignificance, and the soft music drifting through the speakers turned into mere background noise. His attention was completely consumed by the striking resemblance in the little girl's features. Even from afar, an intense feeling of urgency seized him, an instinct he had never truly experienced before. He felt compelled to have a conversation with her. He sought clarity. Yet, just as he contemplated his next move, just as he struggled to summon the strength to rise, Clara was already making her way to the elevator, cradling the child tightly as she vanished behind the descending doors. Edward stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the void left behind by her absence. The meticulously crafted existence he had established for himself had never seemed more precarious. Edward hardly found rest that night. No matter how hard he attempted to banish the vision of Clara and the little girl from his thoughts, it persisted, insisting on his focus. He devoted years to mastering the skill of compartmentalization, meticulously safeguarding his emotions in pursuit of logic and control. Yet this evening, his thoughts are a tumultuous clash of inquiries, each devoid of resolution. Did the child belong to her? It was clear as day. The girl's grip on her was unwavering, and the way Clara enveloped her in a protective embrace made it unmistakably clear. Yet the true inquiry, the one that lingered in his mind, was the very one he doubted he was prepared to confront. Did she belong to him? A peculiar sense of panic coursed through him, an unfamiliar sensation he had never experienced before. If Clara had a child, his child, why had she kept it a secret from him? Did she genuinely think he was unworthy of knowing? Or perhaps, had she assumed he wouldn't be affected at all? As the initial rays of sunlight began to seep through the expansive windows of his suite, Edward had come to a resolution. He would not allow himself to waste another moment in uncertainty. He sought the truth, and he was determined to uncover it. Following a swift shower and a change into one of his meticulously tailored suits, as he believed that maintaining control was essential in any circumstance, he made his way downstairs. He was uncertain whether Clara remained at the hotel, yet an instinct deep within him suggested she was still there. She certainly wouldn't have arrived at a place like this for merely one night. As he entered the restaurant, he surveyed the room with a keen eye. The resort was designed for the affluent, those who effortlessly indulged in midweek getaways without a moment's hesitation. However, Edward had no intention of seeking them out. His gaze fell upon a quaint table by the terrace, where Clara was seated with a young girl at her side. His heart raced at the sight of them together in the sunlight. Clara appeared as breathtaking as ever, her dark brown hair swept back in a relaxed ponytail, exuding a natural grace in her demeanor. The child, if memory serves, was named Lily, as the receptionist had mentioned the night before. She sat quietly, her small legs swinging beneath the table as she nibbled on a piece of toast. It was the first moment Edward had genuinely observed her, and the sight sent a tight knot of unease through his stomach. Her eyes were a striking blue, unmistakably his blue eyes, a truth that cannot be overlooked any longer. Drawing in a calming breath, he advanced, approaching their table with determination. Clara sensed his presence before he uttered a word, her body instinctively tensing, fingers gripping her coffee cup with a newfound intensity. She cast a fleeting look at Lily before turning her gaze back to him, her face a mask of ambiguity. "We must have a conversation," Edward stated, maintaining a calm and measured tone. Clara paused, casting another look at Lily before finally agreeing with a nod. "Not here," she whispered. "Let's rendezvous outside in 15 minutes. Edward gave a slight nod before turning on his heel and walking away, keen to avoid any unnecessary drama. His pulse throbbed in his ears, emotions wound tightly just beneath the surface. 15 minutes later, he found himself by the serene garden terrace at the resort's edge, hands tucked into his pockets, gazing out at the vast ocean. The tumultuous waves offered no solace to the tempest brewing within him. Suddenly, he became aware of footsteps trailing behind him. He glanced over to see Clara positioned there, arms folded, her demeanor cautious. Edward inhaled deeply, seeking to regain his composure. "Does she belong to me?" Edward inquired. Clara recoiled just a bit, her gaze igniting with an enigmatic spark. She let out a breath, glancing down briefly before locking eyes with him. "Indeed," she murmured gently. "She belongs to you." The ground felt unsteady beneath his feet. 3 years have passed. For 3 years, he remained unaware. From this moment forward, everything in his life would change irrevocably. Edward remained motionless, his thoughts grappling with the profound impact of Clara's words. Her words were delivered with such simplicity and quietness, yet the effect crashed over him like a powerful tidal wave. Lily was his beloved daughter. His hands clenched in his pockets as he struggled to maintain a steady breath. A torrent of feelings surged through him, shock, anger, disbelief, yet beneath it all lay a deeper, more primal essence. He had a child, a fact that had eluded him completely. Clara fidgeted, her unease evident as she braced herself for his response. Her arms remained crossed, a posture that suggested she was preparing for whatever might unfold next. "Why didn't you share this with me?" His voice was soft, yet the sharpness in it was unmistakable. Clara let out a quick breath, her fingers brushing against her forehead as she finally locked eyes with him. "This was not how it was meant to unfold, Edward. I never intended to prevent you from having her. However, by the moment I discovered I was expecting, we were already unraveling. Your focus on work left you feeling so far away. I was unsure of the best way to get in touch with you." His jaw clenched, "as if you had made the choice for me. You assumed I wouldn't be affected." Her eyes sparkled with a hint of irritation. "I assumed you might feel a sense of duty. That you would avoid responsibility, not out of desire. I wanted to ensure that Lily never felt like she was a burden as she grew up." Edward released a sardonic chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. "You believed that hiding her away was the wisest choice." Clara stated with conviction, "I believed I was safeguarding her. Safeguarding our interests." The difficulty of that choice was immense, yet in that moment, it seemed like the sole option available to me. Edward dragged his hand across his face, seeking to steady his thoughts. He had constructed his whole existence on reason, on mastery, while crafting deliberate choices. Yet, this was an unforeseen circumstance he had never anticipated. "She's 3, he finally murmured, his voice softened. 3 years of her life vanished. Time lost forever." Clara's face softened, and for the first time, a hint of regret flickered in her expression. "I'm aware," she confessed, "and I won't attempt to rationalize it. However, Edward, I never intended to separate you from her indefinitely." He cast a piercing glance in her direction. "So, what stopped you from getting in touch?" Clara paused, letting out a slow breath. "I feared that if I acted, you would claim her as your own." The words left him speechless. He gazed at her, attempting to grasp the meaning of her recent words. "I wouldn't have done that," he said, his voice strained. Clara locked eyes with him, her face a canvas of inscrutable emotions. "Would you not?" Edward gulped nervously. Truth be told, he found himself uncertain about what actions he might have taken in that moment. He had been unforgiving in his journey, unyielding in his quest for achievement. Would he have contested for custody? Would he have attempted to manage the situation as he managed every other aspect of his life? Perhaps Clara was onto something. Perhaps he wasn't the kind of person she could rely on for something as delicate as a child. Yet he had transformed into someone entirely different. "I want to see her," he said finally, his voice unwavering. "I wish to understand my daughter better." Clara studied his expression intently, contemplating the trustworthiness of his words. Then, gradually, she inclined her head in agreement. "All right," she replied gently. "However, we proceed according to Lily's preferences. She is unfamiliar with you, Edward. One cannot simply enter her world and anticipate that all will align perfectly in an instant." He nodded, comprehension evident in his expression. He expressed that he doesn't anticipate that. "However, I have no intention of leaving this time." Clara observed him intently, and for the first time, he noticed a change in her expression. The fortified barriers remained, yet a fissure had appeared, a slender gap in their midst. "Then we begin gently," she remarked. "Progress unfolds gradually." Edward nodded once more, his heart constricted by feelings he struggled to understand. For years, he had been convinced that he was alone, that the only mark he would leave on the world was the empire he had constructed. For the first time, he came to the realization of his mistakes, and he was determined to do everything necessary to reclaim the time he had squandered. Edward had always approached situations with confidence. He had orchestrated billion-dollar agreements, faced off in boardrooms with the most formidable executives, and maneuvered through crises that would have shattered those of weaker resolve. As he lingered by the hotel's garden terrace, anticipation coursed through him while he awaited Clara's arrival with Lily, an unfamiliar sensation coiling tightly in his chest. "How did you go about introducing yourself to a daughter who was unaware of your existence?" Clara had emphasized that this would unfold gradually, following Lily's pace. Edward grasped that concept. He didn't anticipate her rushing into his embrace or addressing him as Dad right away, yet the significance of the moment still bore heavily on him. 3 years had already slipped away from him. He was determined not to squander another moment. The gentle patter of footsteps prompted him to glance back. Clara approached him, her stance taut yet steady, her deep-set eyes inscrutable. And next to her, gripping her hand firmly, was Lily. Edward's breath rasped in his throat. She was diminutive, hardly coming up to Clara's waist. Her dark curls danced gently with each step, and those blue eyes, mirroring his own reflection each morning, sparkled with a serene inquisitiveness. She grasped her mother's fingers tightly, uncertain in the unfamiliar circumstances that surrounded her. Clara knelt beside her, her voice a gentle whisper. "Darling, it's Edward. He's someone I consider a friend." Edward experienced a sharp pang at the mention of the word friend, yet he remained composed. He grasped the reason behind Clara's words, referring to him as her father directly could have felt too intense. Lily gazed up at him, her head tilting ever so slightly, as though she were examining a riddle that eluded her grasp. She remained silent for a moment, simply gazing up at him with those remarkably large eyes. Edward lowered himself to her height, his movements deliberate and gentle. "Greetings, Lily," he spoke softly. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance." Lily moved a bit, glancing at Clara as if seeking comfort. At her mother's nod, she found her voice at last. "Hello." It was merely a single word, diminutive and hesitant, yet it caused a tightening sensation within Edward. He offered a warm smile, aiming to soothe her nerves. "I understand you have an affinity for puzzles. Is that really the case?" Lily's eyes sparkled with a trace of curiosity. She inclined her head with a measured, deliberate gesture. "I'm not particularly skilled at them," Edward confessed, maintaining a cheerful tone. "Perhaps you could share your knowledge with me at some point." Lily stole another look at Clara, gauging her reaction to ensure everything was all right. After a brief pause, she nodded again. Edward exhaled slowly. He was unaware that it was in his grasp. It may have been small, yet it marked the beginning. Clara stood tall, her fingers gently gliding through Lily's curls. "Why don't we sit?" she suggested, guiding them to a shaded spot where a small table and chairs awaited. Edward trailed behind, his thoughts still spinning from the weight of it all. Before him sat his daughter, her fingers idly toying with the hem of her dress as she cast furtive, inquisitive looks in his direction. Clara delved into her bag and retrieved a petite coloring book along with a vibrant set of crayons, setting them down before Lily. "Feel free to add some color to your work while we chat, all right?" Lily nodded, flipping open the book and thoughtfully choosing a blue crayon. Edward observed her intently for a moment before he chose to speak once more. "What color do you like the most?" he inquired. Lily kept her gaze down, yet her response came softly. "Lavender." He wore a smile. "That's an excellent selection. It's a bold hue." Lily stole another look at him, maintaining his gaze for a heartbeat longer before returning her attention to the page in front of her. Edward let out a breath, adjusting his position in the chair. He had anticipated discomfort, but now that he found himself actually seated with her, he understood the extent of the effort that lay before him. Clara seemed to have an intuition about his thoughts, as she gently broke the silence. She tends to be reserved when meeting new individuals. Edward gave a slight nod. "That's perfectly fine. We'll proceed according to her rhythm." Lily immersed herself in her coloring, while Edward seized the opportunity to observe her closely, the delicate contours of her face, the way she nibbled her lip in focus, and the gentle curl of her fingers around the crayon. It felt almost dreamlike to realize that this small child belonged to him, that he had been absent for her first steps, her first words, and all those precious milestones that parents hold dear. However, he was determined not to let anything else slip by. After some time, Lily paused her coloring and glanced up at him. "What color do you like the most?" Edward beamed at the modest yet meaningful instance. He expressed that he believes he understands now. "Purple seems quite appealing." Lily regarded him for a moment, then nodded as if she found his response satisfactory. Clara observed the exchange, a gentle warmth spreading across her features. Edward understood that this was merely the start, yet for the first time in ages, he sensed he was precisely where he belonged. Edward had never experienced time flowing with such a paradoxical rhythm, both dragging and racing simultaneously. The days after his initial encounter with Lily unfolded like a tightrope walk, every exchange meticulously gauged, every instant imbued with a significance he had never foreseen. He had crafted his professional journey through assertiveness, through seizing opportunities, through ensuring that events unfolded precisely as he envisioned. However, this was not a transaction. This was his daughter, and no plan could ever compensate for the time that had slipped away. He and Clara had established a cautious rhythm. Each morning, he gathered with them for breakfast at the hotel's restaurant, positioned across from Lily as she nibbled her toast with meticulous little bites. She remained timid in his presence, uncertain of his role in her life, yet she had started to open up to him. Initially, it was the little gestures, stealing glances at him as he spoke, responding with a nod to his inquiries. She began sharing small snippets of her day with him, mentioning the peculiar bird she had spotted outside their hotel window and her distaste for the orange juice, which she found too sour. He clung to each word. One afternoon, as he and Clara lounged on a shaded terrace, with Lily engrossed in her small set of toys at their feet, he finally mustered the courage to pose the question that had been eating away at him since the moment he uncovered the truth. "What brings you here, Clara?" She averted her gaze from him initially. Her eyes remained fixed on Lily, observing as their daughter meticulously arranged small plastic cups into a tower. After a moment, she expressed that we required a pause. "Life at home has been challenging." Edward observed her closely, recognizing the tightness in her shoulders. He had been familiar with Clara to the extent that he could sense when she was concealing something. "Challenging?" How he insisted. Clara let out a soft sigh, finally directing her gaze toward him. "Lily has been inquiring about her father." Something within him contorted at that. "What did you say to her?" Clara paused, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Initially, I explained to her that families exist in various forms, with some children having both a mother and father together, while others may not. However, she possesses great intelligence, Edward." She kept inquiring relentlessly. She was curious to find out if you existed, if you were even aware of her presence. Edward let out a breath, his gaze fixed on Lily, who remained absorbed in her tower. The realization that she had devoted her brief existence to pondering him, seeking answers that remained elusive, caused an unexpected ache in his chest. "So you brought her here," he murmured softly. Clara gave a subtle nod. "I wasn't sure if our paths would cross, yet a part of me secretly wished they would." Edward glanced at her again, his expression a mystery that left her intrigued. "Would you have ever shared that with me?" Clara swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the armrest of her chair with increasing intensity. "I'm not sure," she confessed. "I had the desire to. I came close on numerous occasions, yet fear held me back." Edward felt a conflict within himself. He hesitated to hear her reasons, yet he understood the necessity of doing so. "What is there to be afraid of?" Her gaze fell upon her hands. "That you would despise me, that you would loathe her, or that you would attempt to steal her from me." Edward experienced a sudden rush of remorse. He had devoted a significant portion of his life to the notion that control was synonymous with security, that power implied an absence of vulnerability. Had he truly transformed into the sort of man that Clara had dreaded would wield his power against her? "I would never have done that," he said, his voice unwavering. Clara gazed up at him, her deep eyes probing his. "I wished to hold on to that belief." For an extended silence, neither of them uttered a word. Years of silence stretched endlessly between them. Countless thoughts linger unexpressed. Then Lily's tower crumbled with a soft clatter, and she released a faint, disappointed sigh. Edward bent low, meticulously gathering the plastic cups and arranging them in a neat stack once more. "Would you like to give it another shot?" he inquired. Lily glanced at him briefly before offering a subtle nod. She extended her delicate fingers, lightly grazing his as she accepted the cup from his grasp. It was an ordinary moment, yet for Edward, it held profound significance. Clara observed them, a gentle warmth spreading across her face. Perhaps her fears from that time were justified. Perhaps he was not fully prepared. He was prepared at last, and he refused to squander another moment. Edward had always struggled with patience. His whole existence revolved around swift decisions, bold actions that allowed no space for doubt. He was a person who established objectives and realized them, who always ensured that time was not wasted in silence. Yet, he was coming to understand that only through patience could he attain what was genuinely significant. Lily was starting to place her trust in him, but it was unfolding gradually, with caution at every turn. She continued to seek Clara's reassurance whenever he spoke, still pausing before responding to his inquiries. Yet she was gradually allowing him to enter her world. She allowed him to take a seat next to her at breakfast, maintaining a respectful distance from her mother. She allowed him to assist her in selecting colors as she created in her sketchbook. She allowed him to hold the door open for her, exuding confidence as she stepped through without a hint of hesitation. Though they were minor, Edward cherished them as triumphs. One afternoon, he stood outside the hotel's garden courtyard, observing Lily as she knelt beside a row of flowers. She glided her fingers across the petals, whispering softly to herself in a way that eluded his ears. Clara sat on a nearby bench, maintaining a respectful distance while observing Lily with the gentle vigilance of a nurturing figure, attuned to her every action. Edward approached with deliberate slowness, ensuring he didn't surprise Lily. "What are you up to?" he inquired, maintaining a cheerful tone. Lily lifted her gaze to him briefly before returning her attention to the flowers. She spoke to the bees with a straightforward demeanor. Edward arched an eyebrow. "Oh, what are they expressing?" Lily pressed her lips together, deep in contemplation. "Though they are occupied and tend to keep their conversations brief, I sense an appreciation for the flowers on their part." Edward knelt beside her, watching the delicate bees dance among the flowers. He had never paused to observe details like this before. His universe had perpetually been overwhelming, incessantly pressing. Yet, as he sat here with his daughter, the idea of slowing down felt less daunting. "Are you fond of flowers?" he inquired. Lily gave a slight nod. "Mom says they bring joy to people." Edward cast a sidelong look at Clara, who observed them with an air of feigned disinterest. He glanced over his shoulder at Lily. "She is correct. Indeed, they do." Lily pondered this for a moment, then gestured toward a delicate, pale purple flower. "That one is my absolute favorite." Edward beamed. "I recall you mentioning your fondness for purple." Lily gazed at him, her expression one of astonishment, as though she had not anticipated that he would recall such a minor detail. She remained silent, yet a subtle change flickered across her face, a gentler nuance emerging. Edward allowed the moment to linger between them, neither pressing nor hurrying. Eventually, Lily rose to her feet, brushing off her dress with a delicate motion. "I'm feeling quite hungry," she declared. Clara seized the moment to rise to her feet. She nodded in agreement, suggesting we head inside. Lunch is just around the corner. Edward paused for just a moment before he began to speak. How about we share a meal together? Clara cast a quiet glance at Lily, seeking her thoughts. Lily inclined her head, pondering, then gave a nod. Understood. It was a hesitant affirmation, lacking fervor, yet it also didn't outright reject the idea. Edward viewed it as a step forward. As they stepped inside, a sense of calm washed over Edward for the first time since uncovering the truth. Perhaps he had transformed from a mere stranger into something more significant. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was beginning to evolve into something greater. Edward was starting to understand that trust was not a commodity he could simply command. It was a journey he needed to undertake, bit by bit, experience by experience. With Lily, each little triumph held significance. In the days that followed, their exchanges grew increasingly effortless. She still experienced her moments of silence, still paused occasionally before addressing him, yet the doubt in her gaze was diminishing. She released her grip on Clara when he was nearby. She closed the gap between them, no longer hesitant about his presence. One morning, he walked into the breakfast room to see Lily already at their familiar table, a plate of pancakes waiting for her. Clara poured a cup of coffee, her demeanor reflecting a newfound sense of ease that had eluded her for days. Edward drew out his chair and settled in, observing as Lily meticulously drizzled syrup over her pancakes. Are they worthwhile? He inquired. Lily looked up at him, her mind racing as she chewed, then gave a slow nod. They seem fine. Edward wore a sly grin. Merely satisfactory? After a brief pause, she remarked, they'd be improved with strawberries. Edward nodded with a grave expression. I'll keep that in mind for the future. Lily observed him intently, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. In silence, she nudged her plate a fraction closer to him. If you wish, you may take some. Edward sensed a constriction in his chest. It was a seemingly small act, yet from her, it carried a significance that she likely didn't fully comprehend. He grasped his fork, slicing off a delicate morsel before savoring the taste. He remarked that it wasn't bad, yet he agreed with you. Strawberries could enhance their quality. Lily offered a subtle, contented smile before turning her attention back to her breakfast. Clara, having observed the interaction in silence, cast Edward a knowing glance. It marked the inaugural moment when Lily had chosen to share something with him, and they were both acutely aware of it. Following their morning meal, they chose to stroll along the shoreline. The secluded shoreline of the resort was tranquil, with the waves softly caressing the sand. Lily meandered between them, her tiny hand sometimes stretching out to grasp Clara's as they ambled along. Edward observed her as she crouched to retrieve a seashell, examining it closely in her hands before lifting it for a better view. This one is lovely, she remarked. Edward grasped it from her, scrutinizing it closely. Indeed, it is. Are you fond of gathering shells? Lily gave a slight nod. Mom says they're like tiny echoes from the sea. Edward returned the shell to her. The shell returned to her. In that case, it would be wise to hold on to it. Lily paused briefly, then deftly tucked it into the pocket of her dress. In a surprising twist, she extended her hand and grasped his, leaving him utterly astonished. It was a delicate, ephemeral connection, her tiny fingers encircling his for a brief instant before she released him and dashed forward, her laughter ringing out as the water danced around her feet. Edward remained motionless, a profound change stirring within him. Clara, sitting next to him, offered a gentle smile. She whispered, she's becoming accustomed to you. Edward exhaled gently, his gaze fixed on Lily as she twirled gracefully along the shoreline. He confessed that he believed he was becoming accustomed to her as well. For the first time in his life, the allure of business, power, and success faded, revealing that they weren't the most significant pursuits after all. Indeed, she did. Edward had devoted his whole existence to the notion that success was quantified by figures. Income, mergers, market portions. Those were the foundations upon which he had constructed his universe. Yet, as he stood on the beach, observing Lily gather seashells with an expression of sheer joy, he came to the realization that perhaps he had been mistaken all this time. The remainder of the afternoon unfolded in a manner that seemed almost dreamlike. As they strolled along the shoreline, Lily would dash ahead intermittently, eager to chase the waves, only to return moments later, excitedly displaying yet another treasure she had unearthed from the sand. With every glance, her eyes reflected a growing trust, as if she was gradually starting to accept that he would remain by her side. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they had gathered a modest assortment of shells, which Lily meticulously arranged on a wooden deck beside the beach chairs. She settled into a cross-legged position, carefully examining each item before categorizing them into distinct groups. Edward observed, captivated by her unwavering concentration on something so seemingly ordinary. Clara settled next to him, a gentle breeze tousling her dark hair as she shifted her gaze between them. She had never experienced this before, she murmured gently. Edward glanced at her, a frown creasing his forehead. "What did you have?" Clara paused, weighing her words with deliberation. "A paternal presence. A person who is engaged and attentive. Someone who gazes at her with the same intensity you possess." Edward hesitated, grappling with the right words to say in that moment. For years, he had persuaded himself that family was an unnecessary burden, that love and connections were mere distractions that would hinder his progress. Yet, gazing at Lily in this moment, he was struck by a deep longing for all the times that had slipped away from him. He finally admitted, "The past is unchangeable. Yet, I can exist in this moment. If you would permit me." Clara gazed at him, her expression a mystery that defied interpretation. "What occurs when we depart from this location?" Edward let out a breath, his fingers combing through his hair. He had also been contemplating that. Their stay at the resort seemed like a secluded haven, a fleeting reprieve from the everyday world. Yet, he hoped this wouldn't conclude when they vacated their hotel rooms. He expressed a desire for permanence. "I desire to be a part of her life. Not merely for a short span of time. Not merely as a remote presence she hardly recognizes. I desire to take on the role of her father. Truly support her." Clara observed him intently for a prolonged moment before she finally spoke. "It signifies the importance of being present, Edward. Not solely during moments of ease. Not solely when it aligns with your timetable. She isn't a transaction to be bargained over. She is a young child in search of consistency, yearning for the assurance that those around her will remain steadfast." Edward inclined his head, his jaw clenching. "I am aware of that. I am determined to show you that I am capable of fulfilling her needs." Clara examined his expression, and in that moment, he witnessed the final remnants of her uncertainty disappear. "Then show me," she murmured. Just as he was about to reply, Lily dashed over, clutching something firmly in her hands. She opened her delicate fingers, revealing a tiny, flawlessly formed white shell. "This one holds a unique significance." Edward leaned in, carefully accepting the shell from her grasp. "It's stunning," he remarked. "What makes it unique?" Lily inclined her head, deep in thought. "Since it's the final one I discovered today. It resembles a fortunate shell." Edward smiled, a warmth spreading through him as he absorbed the purity in her words. "Then I believe we ought to hold on to it," he remarked, as a reminder. Lily nodded with enthusiasm. Without a moment's pause, she settled onto his lap, her head gently resting against his chest. Edward felt a sudden tightness in his chest. It marked the inaugural moment she approached him independently, unbidden, and without Clara's comforting presence. The gesture was quiet, yet it carried immense significance. Clara observed them, and when Edward's gaze met hers, he noticed a change in her demeanor, something resembling acceptance. For the first time in his life, Edward Sterling sensed he had truly discovered something valuable to cling to. This time, he was determined not to let it slip away. The elegance of this conclusion resides in its subtle yet profoundly moving resolution. It's not about extravagant displays or theatrical proclamations, rather, it centers on something much deeper: commitment, trust, and the gradual restoration of connections. Edward Sterling starts this narrative as an individual who measures success through dominance and authority, convinced that emotional connections merely act as hindrances. Ultimately, he discovers that genuine success transcends the confines of the boardroom. It revolves around what he cultivates in his personal life. The evolution of Lily's feelings towards Edward is what imbues this journey with such strength. Her hesitation to fully accept him as her father adds a layer of authenticity to her trust. It unfolds in fleeting instances, permitting him to join her at the breakfast table, savoring her pancakes, extending his hand toward hers with a sense of ease. The most poignant moment occurs when she willingly settles onto his lap, leaning against him as if she has finally found someone she can trust. That solitary action holds greater significance than any words might convey. Clara's role holds significant importance as well. She transcends the role of a mere love interest; she embodies a mother, fiercely devoted to safeguarding her child's well-being. Her pause stems not from malice, but from a long history of doubt. She must understand that Edward is genuinely committed to remaining by her side, that he won't abandon her when challenges arise. When she finally urges him to prove it, she is offering him the chance to become the father Lily truly deserves, rather than deciding that fate for him. The sense of fulfillment in this ending arises from its deliberate pacing, avoiding a hasty move towards a flawless resolution. Edward doesn't resolve all issues in an instant, and the narrative doesn't wrap up with an improbable fairy tale ending. Instead, it concludes with the assurance of something genuine: a father who is finally taking responsibility, a mother who is starting to regain her trust, and a little girl who is discovering that love can exist without conditions. This tale unfolds around the theme of second chances, the quest to reclaim lost moments, and the profound understanding that family transcends mere blood ties. It's about presence, about commitment, about the decision to embrace love even in challenging times. Ultimately, Edward discovers more than just a daughter. He discovers something infinitely more precious. He discovers a meaning that no level of riches or achievement could ever substitute.
Pathetic boy, you never had a head for success, my dad told me. Not long after, I was trending nationwide. I'd just been announced as one of the youngest male founders on Wall Street. At the family barbecue, everyone went silent when I rolled up in my Ferrari. My name is Joshua Langford. I'm 23 years old, and I built a financial technology startup from scratch in Charleston, South Carolina. Where I'm from, success means calloused hands and a sunburned neck. My father, Nathan, ran a landscaping business for 30 years and measured a man's worth by physical labor. When I chose finance over following him into the family business, the disappointment in his eyes cut deeper than any shovel could dig. For 3 years, I'd been working on an algorithm that could predict market trends better than the big firms. Nights, weekends, holidays, all spent hunched over my laptop while my friends were out living their lives. My dad would walk past my room, shake his head, and mutter something about boys playing with computers. Each time, I'd work another hour just to prove him wrong. Last month, I overheard him talking to my uncle at our family dinner. "Joshua will be back mowing lawns by summer," he said, laughing. "That boy couldn't sell water in a desert." I didn't say anything, just ate my dinner, helped clean up, and drove back to my apartment to finalize the biggest deal of my life. I grew up watching my father build his landscaping company from a single truck to a fleet of 20. Every summer from age 12, I worked for him, cutting grass, planting trees, hauling mulch under the Carolina sun. He taught me the value of hard work, but somewhere along the way, he confused hard work with hard labor. When I got accepted to University of South Carolina's business program, he barely acknowledged it. "College boys think they know everything until they meet the real world," he said, handing me a $20 bill for the road. That was his version of a send-off. My mother, Denise, was different. She slipped me $500 she'd saved from her teaching salary and whispered, "Go make something of yourself that makes you happy." She never said it in front of my dad. During sophomore year, I developed an algorithm that caught the attention of one of my professors. "This could revolutionize how regular people invest," he told me. I dropped out the next semester to focus on building it into something real. When I called home to explain, my mother cried. My father hung up. For the next 2 years, I lived off ramen and worked out of a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. One venture capitalist after another turned me down. "Too young," they said. "Not enough experience." Each rejection email I'd print out and tape to my wall, not as motivation, as a reminder of who didn't believe in me. Thomas Blake, my roommate from freshman year, stuck by me. He'd bring me food when I forgot to eat, proofread my pitches, and never once questioned whether I'd make it. "You're the smartest person I know," he'd say. "Just don't forget us little people when you're rich." Meanwhile, my father's comments grew sharper. At Thanksgiving, he introduced me to his clients as my son who's still figuring things out. At Christmas, he suggested I apply for a manager position at his company, since that computer thing isn't working out. I noticed how he'd suddenly change the subject whenever I tried to explain my work. How he'd interrupt me mid-sentence to point out a neighbor's nicely manicured lawn. How he never once asked to see what I was building. On my 23rd birthday, I got an email from Blackwater Capital, one of the largest hedge funds on the East Coast. They wanted to license my technology, exclusively, for $14 million. I read the email 17 times, standing in my kitchen, coffee growing cold in my hand. I called Thomas first. He screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then I called my mother. She cried again, but different tears this time. I didn't call my father. 3 days later, I signed the contracts in New York. The Blackwater executives took me to dinner at a restaurant where the menu had no prices. The CEO, a woman named Patricia Donovan, raised her glass. "To the future of finance," she said. Everyone clinked glasses. I smiled, but all I could think about was my father's voice. "Pathetic boy, you never had a head for success." That night in my hotel room, I got a text from my cousin Evan, the only person in my family who ever showed interest in what I was building. Just saw the Wall Street Journal article. Holy shit, Josh. You're famous. I opened my laptop. There it was. My face, my company, my story splashed across financial news sites. 23-year-old dropout lands 8-figure deal with Wall Street giant. The article mentioned my age 3 times, as if it were the most remarkable thing about me. I closed the laptop and stared out at the New York skyline. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I just felt clear, like fog lifting off the harbor back home. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I walked into a Ferrari dealership wearing jeans and a t-shirt. The salesman ignored me until I mentioned the price range I was considering. 2 hours later, I drove out in a red Ferrari Roma. Not because I particularly wanted one, but because I needed a message that couldn't be misinterpreted. I didn't call ahead before driving home to Charleston. I knew my father's annual Memorial Day barbecue would be happening, the one where he invited all his clients, employees, and extended family to show off his success. I timed my arrival for exactly 2 o'clock, when everyone would be gathered in the backyard. As I pulled into the driveway, the rumble of the engine drew eyes before the car was even visible. I parked next to my father's pickup truck, the one he'd always been so proud of, and took a deep breath. This wasn't about revenge. This was about finally being seen. I stepped into the backyard carrying nothing but my car keys. The conversation stopped like someone had hit a pause button. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stood at the grill, spatula in mid-flip. "Sorry I'm late," I said, walking toward him. Traffic from New York was terrible. He recovered quickly, putting on the smile he used for clients. "Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence." He clapped me on the shoulder, too hard. "Whose car did you borrow to make that entrance, son?" The guests laughed. I didn't. "It's mine," I said quietly. "Bought it yesterday." "Right," he nodded, winking at Uncle Frank. "And I'm buying a private jet next week." More laughter. I pulled the title from my back pocket and handed it to him. His face changed as he read it. He folded it carefully and handed it back. "Must be nice to have rich friends who trust you with their toys," he said, turning back to the grill. "Grab a plate. Your mother made potato salad." Throughout the afternoon, I tried to talk to him. Really talk. Each time he deflected. When I mentioned the deal, he changed the subject to landscaping contracts. When I tried to explain the technology, he suddenly needed to refill the cooler. When his business partner asked me about the Wall Street Journal article, my father interrupted. "Don't believe everything you read, Pete. Journalists exaggerate everything these days." By evening, most guests had left. I found my father in his office, doing paperwork like he always did after hosting. "Dad, we need to talk about what's happening with my company." He didn't look up. "There's nothing to talk about. You got lucky with some computer thing. Don't think this makes you special." $14 million isn't luck, I said, my voice steady. He finally looked at me, eyes narrow. "You know what built this family? 40 years of breaking my back. Not sitting in a room pressing buttons. Not making up numbers on a screen." He pointed to a photo on his wall, him at 20, standing next to his first truck. "That's real work. That's real success. What I built is real too." "Is it?" He leaned forward. "Let me tell you something, Joshua. I've seen your type before. Flash-in-the-pan success. You'll blow through that money in a year, and those Wall Street sharks will spit you out when they're done with you. And then where will you be?" I didn't answer. "You'll be right back here," he continued, "begging for a job. And I'll have to explain to everyone why my son couldn't hack it in the real world." I left his office without another word. In the kitchen, my mother was washing dishes. She turned, drying her hands. "He's proud of you," she said softly. "He just doesn't know how to show it." I shook my head. "No, Mom. He's not proud. He's threatened." The next morning, I got a call from my cousin Evan. "Uncle Nathan's telling everyone your deal fell through and you lied about everything. He said you rented that car to show off." Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger, just certainty. I spent the next week in Charleston staying at a hotel downtown rather than at my parents' house. I met with lawyers, financial advisors, and the team I was building. But in the background, I was hearing things. About my father, about me, about my company. Thomas texted me. Your dad came by the apartment looking for you. Asked a bunch of questions about where the money's going. My aunt called. Nathan told everyone at church that you're in some kind of legal trouble with those New York people. Is everything okay? Even Patricia from Blackwater reached out. Just checking in. Someone claiming to be your father called our office asking for details about our agreement. Obviously, we didn't provide any. I drove to my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew my father would be working. My mother let me in, nervous energy in her movements as she made coffee. Mom, what's going on with Dad? She sat down, hands wrapped around her mug. He's worried about you, that's all. Worried enough to tell people I'm a liar? Worried enough to call my business partners? She looked down. You have to understand. Your success. It challenges everything he's built his identity around. That's not my problem. No, she agreed quietly, but he's making it your problem. She hesitated. There's something else. The business is struggling. Has been for years. The new landscaping chains are undercutting his prices. He can't compete. The revelation hit me harder than I expected. Why didn't he tell me? Pride, she said simply. The same reason he can't celebrate your success. In his mind, if he admits your way worked, it means his way failed. I left my mother with a promise to fix things. But as I drove away, I realized the problem went deeper than I thought. This wasn't just about my father's pride. It was about his fear. Fear that I represented a future that had no place for men like him. That evening I called Uncle Frank, my father's younger brother and business partner. We met at a bar downtown. He remortgaged the house, Frank told me, staring into his beer. 3 years ago, put everything into the business. New trucks, new equipment, trying to keep up with the big companies. It's not working. Why are you telling me this? Frank looked up. Because yesterday he asked me if I thought you'd be willing to invest your computer money in the landscaping business. He's planning to approach you about it. I sat back. He doesn't believe my success is real. But he wants my money? He believes it's real. He just can't admit it. Frank sighed. Look, your father is a proud man. He built something from nothing. But the world changed, and he didn't. On my way home, I drove past my father's business. The lights were still on. I parked across the street and watched him through the window, hunched over paperwork. For a moment, I saw him clearly, not as my father, but as a man running out of options, clinging to a past that was disappearing. I realized then that his attacks on me weren't just about resenting my success. They were about using me to explain his failure. If my way was wrong, then his way wasn't failing. It was just underappreciated in a world that no longer valued real work. The next morning, I received a text from him. Need to discuss business opportunity. Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m. I texted back one word. Yes. I didn't go to dinner. Instead, I spent the day setting things in motion. First, I called Patricia at Blackwater. I need information on landscaping companies in the Charleston area. Specifically, which ones are acquisition targets and which are expanding. By noon, I had a list of the 3 biggest players in the region. By 3, I had meetings scheduled with 2 of them. Next, I called a commercial real estate agent. I'm looking for properties suitable for a tech incubator, preferably in Charleston's old industrial district. The following morning, I met with Greenscape Enterprises, the largest landscaping company in the state. The owner, Harold Jenkins, was expanding aggressively. We've had our eye on Langford landscaping for a while, he admitted after I explained my interest. Prime service area, loyal customer base. But Nathan won't even take my calls. What if I could change that? I asked. By evening, I had an offer in writing. Greenscape would buy my father's company for $1.2 million and twice what it was currently worth on paper, with a 5-year employment contract for my father as a regional manager. His employees would all keep their jobs with improved benefits. I also had a lease signed on a 15,000 square foot warehouse space that I was converting into the headquarters for my new company. I was bringing my operation back to Charleston. The final piece came together when I hired Evan, who had just graduated with a business degree, as my chief operating officer. "Are you serious?" he asked when I made the offer. "I've never run anything." "Neither had I told him. "But you believe in what we're building. That's what matters." 3 days after missing the dinner with my father, I still hadn't returned his increasingly irritated messages. Instead, I walked into his office unannounced, carrying a folder. He looked up, anger flashing across his face. "So you decided to grace me with your presence, after standing me up." I placed the folder on his desk. "This is more important than dinner." "What is this? Your big investment in my company?" His tone was mocking. "No, it's an acquisition offer from Greenscape. They want to buy Langford Landscaping." The color drained from his face. "You went behind my back?" "I went ahead of you," I corrected. "The business is failing, Dad. You and I both know it. This offer keeps your legacy intact. Your employees keep their jobs. You get to stay on as regional manager with profit sharing. So that's your plan? Sweep in with your Wall Street connections and take over the business I built?" His voice was rising. I shook my head. "The business you built is dying. This saves it." He stood up, trembling slightly. "Get out." "There's one more thing," I said, reaching into my jacket. I placed a key on his desk. "This is for you." He stared at it. "What's this supposed to be?" "It's the key to my Ferrari. Consider it a gift." His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity. It's an advance." I headed for the door, then turned back. "The offer expires in 48 hours. After that, Greenscape approaches your competitors. Think about your employees, Dad. Think about Mom." As I walked out, I heard him pick up the key. The next morning, I got a text from my mother. "He drove the car this morning. Didn't say a word about it. But he drove it." By evening, my father had called Harold Jenkins at Greenscape. 24 hours after that, they had a deal in principle. I watched from a distance, saying nothing, as my father signed away the business he'd built over 40 years. He looked smaller somehow, sitting at that conference table. But when he walked out, the keys to my Ferrari still in his pocket, his shoulders were straight. 2 months later, I stood on a makeshift stage in my newly renovated headquarters. Around me were 200 people, my employees, local business leaders, journalists, and family members. My father stood in the back, arms crossed, still uncomfortable in spaces like this. "Today we're officially launching Horizon Analytics," I announced. "Our mission is to make financial technology accessible to everyone, not just Wall Street firms. And we're proud to be doing it right here in Charleston." Applause filled the room. I continued, "We're also announcing our first local partnership. Horizon is investing $2 million in Greenscape Regional Holdings, the newly formed parent company of several landscaping businesses, including the former Langford Landscaping." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My father's head snapped up. "As part of this investment, we're launching a technology initiative to help traditional service businesses compete in the digital economy. And I'm pleased to announce that Nathan Langford will be heading this initiative as Director of Traditional Industries." The room erupted in applause. I looked directly at my father for the first time. His face was unreadable. "Nathan has built something valuable over 40 years. Knowledge that can't be coded into an algorithm. Experience that can't be learned in a classroom. By combining his expertise with our technology, we're not replacing the old with the new. We're building something better than either could be alone." After the presentation, as people mingled and celebrated, my father finally approached me. "You planned this all along," he said. It wasn't a question. "I plan to build something that matters," I replied. "The rest just fell into place." He looked around at the buzzing activity, the employees hurrying past with purpose, the sign with my company's name on the wall. "Your name's not on the building," he observed. "Neither was yours," I said, "but everyone knew who built it." For the first time since I was a child, I saw something like respect in his eyes. Not approval, we were beyond that now, but recognition. One builder to another. He held out his hand. I took it. "The Ferrari stays with you," I told him. "Consider it a signing bonus." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "I already sold it. Bought a truck instead." He paused. "And put the rest in your company's stock." 6 months later, I sat in my office overlooking the Cooper River. On my desk was a framed article from the Charleston Business Journal, "Local tech firm partners with traditional industries, creating 150 new jobs." My father and I weren't close, probably never would be. But we'd found a different kind of relationship. Once a week, we had lunch to discuss the traditional industries program. He'd started bringing in other business owners, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, men like him who were being left behind by technology. "They don't need handouts," he told me during our last meeting. "They need tools that make sense for them." And I listened, really listened, because he was right. The partnership with Greenscape had exceeded everyone's expectations. My father's expertise, combined with our technology platform, had expanded their business across 3 states. The same employees who once worked for him now had stock options and better health care. My mother had finally quit her teaching job and was traveling, something she'd always wanted to do but never could afford. "Your father actually took a cooking class with me in Italy," she told me, laughing during our weekly call. Can you believe it? Thomas had joined the company as our marketing director. Evan was thriving as COO. We'd hired 30 graduates from local colleges, creating a pipeline of talent that didn't need to leave Charleston for opportunity. As for me, I'd traded proving myself for building something lasting. The $14 million deal that had once seemed like my entire goal was now just the beginning of a much larger story. That evening, as I left the office, I passed the wall where we displayed our company values. At the bottom was a new addition, suggested by my father during one of our meetings. Remember whose shoulders you stand on. I walked out to the parking lot where my basic black sedan was parked next to my father's new truck. No luxury cars needed anymore. We'd both made our points. Driving home along the water, I thought about success, how I'd once defined it as proving my father wrong, and how I now saw it as something we were building together, each in our own way. I'd gotten my revenge, but not how I'd imagined, not by humiliating him or taking away what he valued. Instead, by creating a future large enough to include his past, by building something neither of us could have built alone. That felt like winning, not against him, but for both of us.
My mother-in-law poured something strange into my drink when she thought I wasn't looking. "Special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law," she said with a smile. I thanked her and discreetly switched glasses with her husband, who always criticized my career. 45 minutes later. My name is Julian Mercer, 32 years old, independent photographer based in Asheville, North Carolina. I've built my business from nothing: weddings, wildlife, magazine spreads, the kind of work that pays the bills if you're good at it. And I am. But to my in-laws, especially Diane, what I do has never been enough. "How's the little photography hobby?" Gerald would ask at family dinners, not even trying to hide his disdain. He was an investment banker, the kind of man who measured success in square footage and stock options. Every Sunday dinner at their house was the same. Diane would fuss over her daughter while Gerald interrogated me about my finances. My wife Haley would squeeze my hand under the table, a silent apology for her parents. I'd been shooting a wildlife assignment in Montana all week, trudging through knee-deep snow to photograph bison for National Geographic. I was exhausted, but Haley insisted we couldn't miss her mother's birthday dinner. "Just a couple hours," she promised. I should have listened to that knot in my stomach when Diane cornered me in the kitchen, the way her eyes darted around before she handed me that drink, the slight tremor in her fingers as she said, "I made it special, just for you." Something wasn't right. I just didn't know how wrong it was about to get. Haley and I met 6 years ago at an art exhibition where my work was featured. She was finishing her master's in environmental science, and I was just starting to make a name for myself. We connected instantly. She understood my need to capture the world through a lens, and I admired her passion for protecting it. Her parents were another story. From our first meeting, Gerald made it clear he had expected someone different for his daughter. Someone with a desk job, a retirement plan, a company car. Someone exactly like him. Diane was subtler. She'd praise my photos while asking when I planned to settle into something stable. She'd invite me to family functions, then introduce me as the photographer instead of her son-in-law. For years, I tried to win them over. I'd bring expensive wine to dinner, show them published work, mention high-profile clients. Nothing changed their perception that I was just passing through their daughter's life. A phase she'd outgrow. Last Christmas, I overheard Diane on the phone. "Haley could have married Thomas, you know, orthopedic surgeon, family money. But she chose the creative one." The way she paused before creative made it sound like a disease. Gerald was more direct. When Haley and I announced we were trying for a baby, he pulled me aside. "Children are expensive, son. Maybe think about real employment before bringing one into the world." I never told Haley these things. She loved her parents despite their flaws, and I didn't want to force her to choose sides. So I smiled, shook Gerald's hand firmly at every visit, complimented Diane's cooking, and kept my thoughts to myself. But there were signs I should have taken more seriously. The way Diane would ask Haley to help in the kitchen whenever I talked about a successful project. How she'd accidentally exclude me from family photos. The time Gerald suggested therapy for Haley's impulsive decisions while looking directly at me. I ignored it all, thinking time would eventually bring acceptance. I was wrong. The Friday of Diane's birthday dinner, I returned from Montana with raw, wind-burned cheeks and a memory card full of images that would pay our mortgage for 3 months. I was bone-tired but showered, put on a button-down shirt, and drove us to her parents' colonial-style home in the expensive part of town. Dinner started normally. Gerald bragged about a recent deal. Diane fussed over the table settings. Haley's brother Owen and his wife Vanessa made polite conversation. I nursed a beer and counted the minutes until we could leave. After the main course, Diane announced she'd made her famous sangria for dessert. She disappeared into the kitchen, and I offered to help carry glasses. That's when I saw it. She had 2 glasses separate from the others. As I entered, she quickly added something from a small vial into one of them. It wasn't a garnish or flavor. It was colorless, odorless, and she tucked the vial away the moment she heard my footsteps. "Oh, Julian." "I've got this," she said too brightly. "This one's for you. Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law." My throat tightened. The glass had a barely perceptible film floating on top, catching the light. "Let me help you carry these," I said, taking both glasses she'd prepared. In the dining room, Gerald was checking his phone, barely looking up when I approached. "Sangria, sir." I placed the tampered glass in front of him instead of taking it myself. I watched him drink, making an excuse about preferring water with my dessert. 45 minutes later, Gerald was pale, sweating, and rushing to the bathroom. The violent sounds of his illness echoed through the house. Diane's face drained of color when she realized what had happened. Her eyes met mine across the table, and in that moment, I knew two things with absolute certainty. My mother-in-law had tried to poison me, and she knew that I knew. I didn't react, didn't confront her. Just ate my chocolate cake while Haley rushed to check on her father. In the chaos that followed, Gerald insisting it must have been food poisoning, Diane stammering about bad shellfish, I quietly pocketed the untouched glass meant for me. Something had shifted inside me. The anger I felt wasn't hot or explosive. It was cold, deliberate. I wasn't just going to let this go, but I wasn't going to fight their way either. I was going to make them face exactly who they were. The Monday after the dinner, I took the glass to Jason, a former client who ran a toxicology lab. "Personal or professional?" he asked when I explained what I needed. "Family matter," I replied. 3 days later, he called. "Julian, there were benzodiazepines in that drink. Nothing lethal, but enough to knock someone out for hours, maybe cause some memory loss. Where did you get this?" I thanked him and asked for a written report. I didn't answer his question. That night, I told Haley I wanted to skip Sunday dinner for a while. Said I needed to focus on an upcoming exhibition. She was disappointed but understood. I didn't tell her about the test results. Not yet. I needed more information first. Over the next 2 weeks, I did some digging. Diane had a prescription for Xanax from 3 different doctors. She'd been doubling and tripling her doses for years. There were also rumors about her in town, strange behavior at a neighbor's party, accusations of stealing jewelry at her country club, stories her family had worked hard to bury. I compiled everything and waited for my moment. It came when Haley mentioned her mother needed photos for a social media profile. "She specifically asked if you would take them," Haley said, surprised by the request. I agreed. The following Saturday, I arrived at their house alone, camera bag in one hand, a sealed envelope in the other. Diane was waiting, dressed expensively, makeup perfect. "Gerald was at the office," she explained. "Before we start," I said quietly, "I thought you might want to see this." I handed her the envelope containing the toxicology report, along with printouts of her multiple prescriptions. Her hands trembled as she read. "This is absurd," she whispered. "I would never." "We both know what happened," I cut her off. "What I don't know is why." Her face hardened. "You're not good enough for my daughter. You never will be. A man should provide security, not pictures." "And drugging your daughter's husband provides security?" I kept my voice level. "It wasn't going to hurt you," she snapped. "Just make you sick. Make you miss that ridiculous gallery opening you've been talking about for months. Show Haley that you're unreliable." I let that sink in. "Here's what happens next," I said finally. "You're going to tell Gerald what you did. Then you're both going to start treating me with respect. Not because you've suddenly changed your minds about me, but because the alternative is Haley finding out exactly who her parents are." Diane laughed, but it sounded hollow. "She'll never believe you over us." I picked up my camera bag. "Maybe not. But she'll believe the lab report, and the prescription records, and the neighbors you've alienated. Are you willing to bet your relationship with your daughter on that?" I left without taking a single photo. That night, Diane called Haley in tears, claiming I'd behaved inappropriately during our session. Said I'd been hostile and threatening. When Haley confronted me, I couldn't hide the truth anymore. I showed her everything, the lab report, the prescriptions, even text messages from her mother that had become increasingly hostile over the years. "My mother wouldn't do this," she kept saying, but her voice lacked conviction. The next day, she confronted her parents. I wasn't there, but when she returned home, her eyes were red from crying. "My father says it's all a misunderstanding," she said quietly, "that you're trying to drive a wedge between us because you're insecure about your career." I just nodded. I'd expected this. "What do you think?" I asked. She didn't answer, just crawled into bed and turned away from me. I'd pushed back, but somehow I'd fallen deeper into their trap. Now I was the villain in their story, and they'd managed to plant doubt in the one person whose opinion mattered most to me. For 2 weeks, Haley barely spoke to me. She went to her parents' house alone, came back with red eyes and new doubts. I threw myself into work, spending long hours in my studio, waiting for the storm to pass. Then a package arrived for me. No return address, just my name scrawled across the top in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "You should see this. V double quote. Vanessa, Owen's wife." The drive contained video files, home security footage from Gerald and Diane's house. The timestamps showed the night of the dinner. There was Diane in the kitchen, clearly adding something to a drink. There was me entering, taking the glasses. There was Gerald drinking from the tampered glass. But there was more. Footage from after we'd left, Diane screaming at Gerald, blaming him for drinking from the wrong glass. Gerald yelling back, "This isn't the first time you've done something like this." I watched the footage 3 times, trying to process what I was seeing. Not just confirmation of Diane's actions, but evidence of a pattern. Evidence that Gerald knew. The next file was from 2 days after the dinner. Diane and Gerald argued in their living room about me. "He knows what you did," Gerald said. "So what?" Diane replied. "It's his word against mine. Haley will never choose him over family." "And if she does?" "Then she's not the daughter I raised," Diane said coldly. "Don't worry. I've already started talking to her about their marriage problems, planting seeds. By the time I'm done, she'll be filing for divorce and thinking it was her idea." I shut my laptop, hands shaking. This wasn't just about me. This was a systematic effort to control Haley's life, to isolate her from anyone who didn't fit their vision, and they'd been doing it for years. I called Vanessa immediately. "Why did you send this to me?" "Because they did the same thing to me when I married Owen," she said quietly. "They tried to break us up for 2 years, said I wasn't good enough. It almost worked. Why didn't you tell us?" "Owen doesn't know," she admitted. He worships his father, believes everything he says. I've tried to tell him, but he thinks I'm paranoid. I just couldn't watch them do it to someone else." The next day, I received a text from Gerald. "We should talk. Man to man, no wives." I met him at his country club. He was waiting in a private room, drinking bourbon. "Julian," he began, "families are complicated. My wife, she can be difficult, protective, but she means well." "Drugging someone means well?" I asked. He waved his hand dismissively. "A misunderstanding. Diane takes medication for anxiety. She probably mixed up the glasses." "I have the security footage, Gerald." His face changed instantly, hardening into something cold and calculating. "What do you want?" "Money? Is that what this is about? I always knew you married Haley for financial reasons." "I want you both to leave us alone," I said simply. "Stop trying to convince Haley I'm not good enough. Stop interfering in our marriage." Gerald leaned forward. "You think this is the first time we've dealt with someone like you? People who want to take advantage of our family?" He laughed. "Haley will come home where she belongs. She always does. Ask her about Thomas. Ask her about the fiancé before you." I felt cold. "What are you talking about?" "Haley was engaged before she met you. Nice guy, doctor. We didn't like his background. Took us 6 months to convince her he was wrong for her. She broke it off. Came home crying to Daddy." He smiled. "History repeats, son." On the drive home, I called Haley's college roommate, Bethany, asked her about Thomas. "Oh God," she said. "That was awful. He was perfect for her, but her parents, they convinced her he was cheating, planted evidence. He tried to tell her the truth, but by then she didn't trust him anymore." The pattern was clear now. This wasn't just about me. It was about control, complete control over their daughter's life. And they'd done it before. I didn't confront Haley immediately. Instead, I started gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I reached out to Thomas, who was initially reluctant to speak with me. When I explained the situation, he sent me old emails between him and Haley, showing how her parents had systematically undermined their relationship. I contacted other ex-boyfriends, old friends of Haley's who'd mysteriously drifted away. A pattern emerged. Anyone who encouraged Haley's independence was gradually pushed out of her life. Vanessa provided more security footage showing Diane and Gerald discussing their plans for us. "Once they divorce, we'll convince her to move back home," Gerald said in one clip. "She can run the foundation. Meet suitable men. I compiled everything onto a single drive. Then I invited Owen and Vanessa over for dinner, without telling Haley I was about to destroy her family's image. Over dessert, I connected my laptop to our TV. "There's something you both need to see," I said. For the next hour, we watched the footage together. Haley sat motionless, her face pale. Owen kept shaking his head, muttering, "That's not my parents," under his breath. When it was over, Haley turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed you to see for yourself," I said. "All of it. Not just what they did to me, but what they've been doing to you your entire life." Owen stood up furious. "This is bullshit. You've edited these videos. My parents wouldn't do this." Vanessa touched his arm. "They did it to us too, Owen. Why do you think they suddenly started liking me after we had James? Because a grandchild meant they had leverage." The color drained from Owen's face. "You never told me." "I tried," she whispered. "You wouldn't listen." Later that night, Haley crawled into bed beside me. "I need time to process this," she said softly. "But I believe you. And I'm sorry I doubted you." The next morning, Diane called. Haley put her on speaker. "Darling, I was thinking you should come stay with us for a while," Diane said cheerfully. "Your father and I are worried about you. Marriage is hard, and sometimes separation can give clarity." "Mom," Haley interrupted, "I've seen the videos." Silence. Then, "What videos?" "The security footage. Of you drugging Julian's drink. Of you and Dad plotting to break up my marriage." Another pause. "Haley, whatever he's shown you has been manipulated. You know Julian has always been jealous of our family." "Stop." Haley's voice was firm. "We're coming over tonight, all of us. Owen, Vanessa, Julian, and me. We're going to talk about this as a family. No more lies." After she hung up, Haley turned to me. "They'll deny everything. They'll try to turn this around on you." I nodded. "I know." "So, what's our plan?" For the first time in weeks, I smiled. "I think it's time your parents met the real me, the one who doesn't just take photos, but knows how to tell a story." That night, we arrived at Gerald and Diane's house with my camera equipment. Owen and Vanessa were already there, sitting stiffly in the living room. Gerald seemed confident. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted, setting up my tripod. "I'm documenting this conversation for the family archives." Diane objected immediately. "This is private family business." "Exactly," I agreed. "Family business, and I'm family, even though you've tried very hard to change that." For the next 2 hours, we laid it all out. The drink, the manipulation, Thomas, the other ex-boyfriends, the pattern that had shaped Haley and Owen's entire lives. Gerald and Diane denied everything, of course, called me unstable, manipulative. But with each denial, I played another clip, showed another email. Their faces grew paler, their denials weaker. Finally, Haley stood up. "I love you both. You're my parents, but what you've done is unforgivable. You don't get to control my life anymore." Owen nodded. "We're adults. We choose our own partners, our own paths." Diane started crying, not from remorse, but from the realization that she was losing control. Gerald just looked stunned, as if he couldn't comprehend that his children were defying him. As we prepared to leave, I handed Gerald a USB drive. "This contains everything, the footage, the emails, the testimonies. It's yours to keep." "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked suspiciously. "It means that I'm not going to ruin your reputation by sharing this with anyone else. That would hurt Haley, and I would never do that." I paused. "But if you ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever try to manipulate Haley or speak against me, copies will go to every member of your country club, your business partners, and your precious social circle." For the first time since I'd met him, Gerald looked at me with something resembling respect. "I underestimated you." "Yes," I said simply. "You did." 6 months passed. Haley and Owen began therapy to work through the damage their parents had caused. Diane and Gerald kept their distance, sending occasional texts but respecting the boundaries we'd established. Then, over the holidays, they invited us all to dinner. "A fresh start," the invitation read. Haley wanted to go. "They're still my parents," she said, "and they're trying." I agreed, but I wasn't naive enough to believe they'd changed. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. Diane had prepared a feast. Gerald was charming, asking about my latest projects with what appeared to be genuine interest. After dinner, Gerald invited me into his study. "I have a proposition for you," he said, pouring me a scotch. "I've been thinking about your career. Photography is, well, it's been good to you. But have you considered diversifying? I could bring you into my firm, junior partner track. The salary would be substantial." I took the glass but didn't drink. "Why would you do that?" "Your family," he said smoothly. "And I respect how you handled the unpleasantness. You protected my daughter while standing your ground. That's what a real man does." I set the glass down untouched. "I appreciate the offer, but no." His smile tightened. "Julian, be reasonable. This is an olive branch, a way for us to move forward." "No," I repeated. "It's another attempt at control. You can't buy me, Gerald, and you can't stand the fact that Haley loves me exactly as I am." "Don't be a fool," he hissed, dropping the facade. "Everyone has a price." I stood up. "That's where you're wrong, and that's why you'll never understand your daughter." I walked back to the dining room where Diane was showing Haley photo albums. "Look at these," she was saying. "You were so happy when you lived at home." Haley caught my eye across the room. She could see from my expression that something had happened. I gave a slight nod and she stood up. "Mom, Dad," she announced clearly, "I have something to tell you." Everyone turned to look at her. "We're having a baby, Julian and I. I'm 3 months pregnant." The shock on their faces was genuine. Diane recovered first, rushing to embrace her daughter with tears in her eyes. Gerald approached more slowly, glancing between Haley and me. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "Thank you," I replied. Then, lowering my voice so only he could hear, "This child will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you that." His face hardened, but he nodded once. He understood the message. As we drove home that night, Haley squeezed my hand. "They'll never change, will they?" "No," I said honestly, "but they'll have to accept that we have." 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Gerald's attorney. Inside was a deed to a house, our house, which we'd been renting, and legal documents establishing a trust fund for our unborn child. There was no note, no conditions, no strings, just the transfer of assets, clean and irrevocable. It wasn't an apology. Gerald wasn't capable of that. But it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the only one he could give, that we had won. Our daughter was born in summer. We named her Eliza, after my grandmother. When Diane and Gerald came to the hospital, they brought gifts but maintained a respectful distance. They cooed over the baby, took photos, and left without trying to give us parenting advice or financial lectures. Months passed. Our relationship with them settled into something resembling normalcy. They never apologized for what they'd done, but they stopped trying to control Haley's life or undermine my career. One evening, as I was editing photos in my studio, Haley came in carrying Eliza. "My mother called," she said. "She wants us to come for Christmas." I looked up from my computer. "What do you want to do?" "I think we should go," she replied, "but with conditions. We stay at a hotel, not their house. We leave when we want to leave. No unsupervised time with Eliza." I nodded. "Sounds reasonable." She sat down beside me, bouncing the baby gently. "You know, I used to think success meant making my parents happy, getting their approval, meeting their expectations. And now?" She looked down at our daughter, then back at me. "Now I know it's about making choices I can be proud of, standing by the people I love." 2 weeks before Christmas, a large envelope arrived from Gerald. Inside was a glossy brochure for his company's annual report. My photographs were featured throughout. Landscapes, portraits, architectural shots. The work I'd done on my own terms, without his interference. There was a brief note. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy. G double quote." It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It was something else. Respect, perhaps. The acknowledgement that I was successful on my own terms, not his. I didn't call to thank him. We both understood this wasn't about gratitude. It was about recognizing the new boundaries, the new reality. That spring, I opened my own gallery in downtown Asheville. At the grand opening, Haley stood beside me, Eliza on her hip. My parents flew in from Oregon. Friends and clients filled the space, admiring the images I'd captured over the years. Gerald and Diane came too toward the end of the evening. They didn't stay long. Diane held Eliza briefly, under Haley's watchful eye. Gerald shook my hand, nodded at the photographs with genuine approval, and left without making any suggestions about how I should run my business. As we locked up that night, Haley asked, "Do you think they've changed?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally. "But they've accepted that they can't change us. And sometimes, that's enough." Later, as we sat on our porch watching the stars come out over the mountains, Eliza asleep in her crib upstairs, I realized something I'd never fully articulated before. I hadn't won by playing Gerald and Diane's game. I'd won by refusing to play it at all. I'd stood my ground, protected what mattered, and built my life according to my own definition of success. Not with schemes or manipulation, but with honesty and quiet persistence. In the end, that was the most satisfying revenge of all. Living well, on my own terms, with the family I loved beside me.